The bench outside the desert station hadn't been painted in years. Wind had peeled the green from its wood, leaving behind a brittle gray that matched the dust in the air. It creaked as the weight of the man shifted, though he barely moved. Beside him, the woman sat like still water, calm, deep, unreadable. They weren't waiting for a train. Koa never said what he was waiting for. Tahana knew better than to ask. She sat close enough to feel the heat of him, not so close the town would talk more than it already did. The sun hadn't reached its peak, but the wind carried the dry breath of noon. Everything shimmered under it, tin roofs, glass windows, even the horses tethered outside the post office. Heat made the world tremble at its edges. And from the alley beside the livery stable, a girl emerged. 5 years old at most. Ribbons frayed in her hair, feet bare, dress stained with orange clay. She clutched something in one fist, a bit of cloth or an old sock. Her eyes searched for something: food, a shadow, someone kind. Nobody looked. Not the station clerk inside spitting tobacco. Not the old men playing cards beside a crate. Not the women standing by the water pump, murmuring behind gloved hands. But Tahana saw her. She didn't call out. Didn't startle the girl by rushing. She simply turned her face toward her, lifted her chin in that soft Apache way that meant, "I see you, I acknowledge you, I will not harm you." The girl stopped walking. Koa watched with the eyes of a man who'd seen things he never told anyone. His jaw clenched once. He didn't speak. The girl stared at Tahana's long dark braid and the way the sun caught the silver brooch on her chest. She blinked hard, then took 3 small steps forward. Then 5. Then she was standing in front of them. Tahana saw the dust on her cheeks, the skin pinked from sun, the slight tremble in her lower lip. "I don't have a mama," the girl whispered. "Can I spend a day with you, ma'am?" There was no drama in her voice, no pleading. Just a child's raw truth, hollow and haunting. Tahana's heart cracked. Not like thunder. More like dry bark splitting after too many seasons of drought. She rose slowly from the bench, knelt before the child, and reached out, palm up, soft and open. The girl didn't hesitate. She placed her tiny hand in it. Koa shifted. He didn't object. That was enough. Tahana smiled, just a little. "You hungry?" The girl nodded. "Then let's find you some bread." They walked down Main Street, Apache woman, giant man, and small barefoot girl, with the air thickening behind them like a tide of murmurs. Inside the mercantile, Mrs. Latham, the shopkeeper, blinked like a startled chicken. We don't serve." "She's hungry," Tahana said gently. Mrs. Latham looked at Koa, standing behind them like a silent mountain. She reached for a loaf of cornbread without another word. They sat on a bench outside, and the girl tore at the bread with both hands. Crumbs clung to her chin. She chewed like she hadn't eaten anything whole in days. "What's your name?" Tahana asked. "Lena," the girl mumbled through a bite. "I think. That's what Mama used to say." "Where's your mama now?" Lena blinked. The words didn't come. Only a shake of the head. Tahana didn't press. Koa watched them quietly. A sunbeam cut across his weathered cheek. He looked at Lena the way a man watches fire, entranced, afraid to touch it, but unable to look away. A group of townswomen passed on the opposite boardwalk, pausing just enough to glance. "Is that the orphan from the mill collapse?" one whispered. "I heard she's been sleeping behind the tannery." "And now she's with them?" "Them." Tahana turned her body slightly, shielding Lena from the words as if she could block them with her spine. They brought her to their wagon, gave her a cup of water from their canteen, and Tahana rubbed her cracked feet with salve made from pine resin and sweet grass. The girl winced at first, then leaned into the touch with a soft sigh. "I don't need to stay forever," she murmured. "Just today." Tahana tucked a blanket around her. "Then today, you're ours." Koa sat outside the wagon, carving something from cedar with his hunting knife. He didn't look inside. But he carved faster than usual, and his hands shook a little near the knuckles. That night, they lit a small fire beyond the edge of town. Koa cooked beans and deer meat in a tin pot. Lena asked if she could hold the spoon, stir it. Tahana helped her, guiding her hands. The girl spilled a little. She looked up, ashamed. But Koa only rumbled, "It'll taste better with your touch, little one." Lena smiled. Later, she curled up on a bedroll beside Tahana. The stars blinked down like scattered prayers. A coyote howled far off in the hills. Lena gripped Tahana's braid gently, like a child holds the hem of hope. "Are you a mama?" she asked. Tahana hesitated. "No. Not yet." Lena nodded and closed her eyes. And Koa, who hadn't spoken for hours, whispered into the night, "Maybe now you are." When Lena fell asleep, Tahana stayed awake, stroking the child's dusty curls. Her chest ached with something she hadn't felt in years, not grief, but its opposite. A flutter. A chance. Koa sat across the fire, watching her. He didn't speak. But his hand reached toward hers. She took it. Somewhere beyond the hills, a train whistle moaned, long and lonesome. But none of them moved. In the hush of night, in the small cradle of firelight and starlight, a family was forming, not from blood, but from need, from grace, from one child's courage to walk toward warmth. And tomorrow, they would face the world. But tonight, the girl slept safe, and Tahana watched over her like the moon watches the sea, silent, sure, and full of light the child did not yet know she carried. The sun rose without apology, casting gold across the cracked ground and wood-planked porches of the town. Morning light did not ask questions, it merely revealed what men tried to hide. Dust clung to the seams of every building like guilt. Lena stood between Tahana and Koa as they walked through town. Her little hand clutched the woman's skirt, her feet now wrapped in soft deer-hide moccasins. The dress Tahana had stitched from old calico hung just above her knees, blue with a fading white hem and a patch sewn over the side where time had worn a hole. No one smiled as they passed. A milkman tipped his hat toward the ground, not them. The woman at the boarding house porch shifted her rocking chair away. Even the dogs looked with a strange, watchful stillness. Tahana knew the look. It was the same one she'd seen when riding through white towns after the war, half caution, half disgust. Koa said nothing. He never did. He walked beside them, tall as a tree, shadow heavy behind him. He was used to being feared. But this silence felt different. It wasn't fear, it was judgment, sharp and precise like a sewing needle hidden in lace. They stopped at the general store to pick up salt and oats. Inside, the air smelled of old sugar and cracked leather. Mr. Fenley stood behind the counter, fingers greasy from counting coins. His eyes fell on Lena, then flicked to Tahana. "Well now," he muttered, "you folks starting a school for strays?" Koa stepped forward without a word. Fenley stepped back. Tahana placed the coins on the counter with slow, deliberate grace. "She's hungry," she said simply. Fenley counted them with shaking fingers and handed over the sack. "Don't get too attached." The words floated in the air long after they left. On the boardwalk, townsfolk had gathered like crows, spread out, but linked by glances, shared whispers, nods half hidden behind fans and newspaper corners. "She's too young to know what she's doing. Where's her real kin? That Apache woman's just trying to get sympathy. Or steal the girl's inheritance. Poor thing. Can't have a child of her own." The words weren't shouted. They were breathed. But Lena could feel them, as children do, with that wild sixth sense that blooms from abandonment. Her steps slowed. Her eyes dropped. The patch on her dress suddenly felt very large. Tahana kneeled beside her. "You're safe with us," she whispered. Lena nodded, but didn't speak. Not for hours. Later that day, they brought her to the shaded edge of the woods where wild lavender bloomed. Tahana showed her how to weave flowers into thread, how to braid a crown. Lena tried, fingers clumsy but eager. Koa carved silently nearby, fashioning something from a block of cedar. The girl glanced over at him. "What are you making?" He looked up, eyes softer than his voice. "A bird. For your pocket." Lena grinned. "Will it fly?" Koa shrugged. Might surprise us. She laughed, the sound cracking the still air like rain after a dry spell. Tahana blinked as if she'd forgotten how beautiful joy sounded. But joy doesn't last long where judgment lives. That evening, as they made their way back into town, a sharp voice called from behind the preacher's house. You think God's blind to what you're doing? It was Reverend Clell Maynard, white hair, white collar, voice like polished iron. She's not yours, he said, walking toward them. The Lord gave her life, and he'll want her raised proper. By her kind. Tahana didn't flinch. And what kind is that? Civilized, he snapped. With scripture. Not medicine men and bonfires. Koa took one step forward. The Reverend's eyes narrowed. I've seen your kind raise children, too, Tahana said, her voice low but steady. With belts. With empty plates. You don't belong here. Then neither does mercy, she answered. He stormed away. But the line he drew with his words remained in the dust. That night, Lena lay curled in the wagon, clutching the wooden bird Koa had finished. Its wings were too short, its beak crooked, but it was hers. She held it like a secret. Outside, Koa sat by the fire, his knife on his knee. He hadn't spoken since the Reverend's warning. Tahana sat beside him. The air between them was full of unsaid things. She's just a child, she said finally. He didn't look at her. So were we. They sat in silence until the fire crackled low. Then he spoke again. She's already changed you. Tahana turned toward him. No. She's just reminded me who I was before the silence. Koa looked toward the stars. She's waking something up in me too. Something I buried in the war. In the grave. Tahana reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. When morning came, Lena rose with tangled hair and a whisper of a smile. Tahana braided it slow, gentle, humming a tune her mother used to sing, one from long before the railroad came, before the world split apart. Down the street, Widow Agatha Pike stood on her porch, arms crossed like a gate that would not open. She eyed the little family with suspicion, then ducked inside to write a letter. Tahana didn't know it yet, but Agatha had begun a petition, one to relocate Lena to a more suitable home. At the edge of town, the marshal watched it all. Jed Vorn had fought beside Apaches, once lost a brother and half his hearing to the same war. He owed them more than he ever paid. He said nothing now, just leaned against the post with a frown too deep for a man who hadn't yet spoken. Lena spent the afternoon drawing in the dirt. She sketched stick figure shapes, one tall with feathers in its hair, one small with a smile, one woman with a braid like a river. She wrote a word beside them. Home. Tahana saw it and said nothing. Just crouched beside her and pressed her forehead to the child's. That night, Lena didn't sleep by the fire. She crept into Tahana and Koa's wagon, crawled under their blanket without asking, and curled between them. Tahana didn't move. Koa turned slightly, arm hovering in the air. Lena whispered, "Can I stay longer than today?" Koa exhaled. Tahana touched her hair. "You can stay," she whispered, "as long as you want." Outside, a dog barked once. A shutter slammed in the wind. Somewhere far off, the Reverend lit a lamp and wrote a name in a book. But inside the wagon, the girl slept between the arms of two people who had never spoken vows, never held a child of their own, and never stopped hoping the world might give them one small chance to love something soft again. It would not be easy. Nothing worth keeping ever was. But they had chosen her. And now, whether the town turned its face or not, they would not turn theirs away. The wind carried summer now, warmth tucked into its folds, the scent of hay and smoke drifting through the trees. The world looked softer in the early light. But in town, nothing had softened. Eyes still narrowed. Doors still shut early when Koa passed. And Lena still felt the hush that followed her every step. They didn't tell her why the women whispered. They didn't explain what prejudice meant. They simply lived around it, quietly, gently, with small acts that spoke louder than sermons. Tahana stood at the edge of the pasture, watching Koa mend the fence rail with slow, strong hands. Lena crouched nearby, gathering wildflowers in a tin bucket. She hummed a tune Tahana had taught her, a lullaby in Apache. She didn't understand all the words, but she sang them anyway, and something about that made Tahana's throat ache. Later, in the shade of their wagon, Tahana pulled out scraps of fabric, soft pieces from old shirts and dresses, and began cutting shapes. Lena watched, head tilted. "What are you making?" Tahana didn't answer right away. Her fingers moved in rhythm, weaving the past into present. "A dress," she said at last. "One that's just yours." Lena's eyes widened. "Really?" Tahana nodded. "Not patched. Not borrowed. Yours." Lena touched the fabric with reverence, like it might disappear. "Mama used to say I'd get one when I turned 6. I never turned 6. "You will," Tahana said. "And you'll wear this when you do." Koa sat by the fire that night, carving again. His knife worked slower now, more careful, as if the wood needed comforting too. The shape was delicate, a bird again, but different this time. Wings spread. Neck curved upward. "What's this one for?" Lena asked, leaning on his arm. He looked at her. "For your windowsill. So the wind knows where you sleep." She didn't answer. She wrapped her arms around his waist instead. The next day, Marshal Vaughan rode by. He didn't dismount. Just tipped his hat and said, "Word is the widow's stirring up signatures. She's saying you're keeping the girl out of pity or pride." Koa's eyes darkened. "We're keeping her out of love." The marshal nodded once. "That's harder to write on paper." Tahana folded her arms. "Can they take her?" "Maybe. Maybe not. Depends how loud they shout." Koa looked past him, toward the hills. "Let 'em shout. I've stood in front of bullets quieter than their words." But it wasn't the threats that hurt, it was the things Lena began to notice. One afternoon at the well, she reached for the pump handle. Another child, a blond boy in suspenders, looked at her and pulled his mother's skirt. The woman said nothing. Just turned and left, water forgotten. Lena looked down at her shoes. Tahana handed her the pail. "There's nothing wrong with you." Lena whispered, "They don't want me near. They're afraid of what they don't understand." "Is it my skin?" Tahana crouched beside her. "No. It's their eyes that don't work right." They walked home slower than usual. Lena didn't hum. That evening, Koa brought her a paintbrush and a pot of whitewash. "Want to help me mark the barn?" Lena looked confused. "What for?" He dipped the brush and made a wide stroke across the wood. "This is where the brave live." She stared. "Me? You're still here, aren't you?" She grinned then, white and fierce, and added her own mark next to his, a shaky handprint, too small for the wall but too big to be ignored. 2 days later, Widow Agatha came with a folded letter and a stiff spine. "Town's voting Tuesday. If you've any decency, you'll surrender the girl before then." Koa didn't respond. He just stepped between her and the doorway. Tahana emerged with Lena behind her, hands dusted in flour. Agatha scoffed. She should be learning hymns, not baking fry bread. Tahana's voice was calm. She's learning love. She's learning heathen ways. She's learning to sleep through the night. Agatha flinched. "We'll see what the marshal decides." And she left in a swirl of skirts and pride. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She tossed under the blanket, fists clenched. "Will they take me?" she asked in the dark. Tahana turned toward her, voice like a tide. "Not if we can help it." "But what if they do?" Koa sat on the step outside, listening. He hadn't built a door on the wagon. Just a flap. It never felt right to close her in. "If they try," he called gently, "they'll find we don't break easy." Lena sat up. "Promise?" "I've carried heavier," he said. "And never dropped a thing that mattered." The moon passed slowly across the sky, and at last, Lena slept. Tahana stayed awake, watching the child's chest rise and fall, as if memorizing the shape of peace. Morning came with thunder in the distance, not the sky kind, but the kind that walks on 2 feet and calls itself law. 3 town elders arrived. With them came Reverend Maynard and Widow Agatha. Behind them, Marshal Vaughan, reluctant, dust on his shoulders, hat low over his brow. "This is not a trial," the Reverend said, "but a reckoning. We ask the child be placed in more appropriate care." Koa stood in front of the wagon. Tahana behind him. Lena peered out from the window. "And who decides what's appropriate?" Koa asked. "We do," said Agatha. "The town. The people who raised you, traded with you, buried their sons beside yours." "You didn't bury them beside me," Koa said coldly. "You buried them on top." Marshal Vaughan stepped forward. "There's precedent, Koa. If it comes to court." "Let it," Tahana said. "We'll tell our story. No judge will hear it. Then we'll speak anyway." Lena stepped down from the wagon then. She wore the blue dress, hands smoothed across the front as if to hide the patch. She stood between them, Tahana to her left, Koa to her right. "I don't want to go," she said clearly. Agatha opened her mouth, but the Reverend held up a hand. "Child, this is not your decision." "It should be," Koa growled. "It's not," said Vaughan. "But it might be if it were formal." "What do you mean?" Tahana asked. The marshal hesitated. "If you submit to tribal guardianship, and your council agrees to vouch for you, it might hold in court. Even against townsfolk." Koa turned to Tahana. "It means making it official." Tahana looked at Lena. "Then let's make it official." And that night, while others sat in judgment, Koa rode under moonlight toward the tribal lands. Tahana stayed behind, sewing a ribbon into Lena's hair, her hands shaking not from fear, but from hope. And for the first time since her own stillborn winter, she let herself believe the ache in her chest might finally have a name. Morning came with the scent of juniper and sun-warmed cedar. The wind had changed overnight, softer somehow, less like judgment, more like promise. Lena stood at the fence with her arms crossed over the top rail, watching the horizon. She'd grown taller only a little, but enough that her chin now cleared the post. Her hair was longer, dark strands braided each morning by Tahana with blue ribbon at the tip. Koa had been gone 3 days. "He's not lost," Tahana said, kneeling to plant sprigs of rosemary near the wagon's edge. "I didn't say he was," Lena replied, though her voice betrayed the worry tucked between her ribs. "You don't have to say things for them to be true," Tahana said gently. Lena looked down at her boots. They were Koa's once, cut and refitted for her size. She still tripped sometimes. But they stayed on. That afternoon, Tahana brought out a package. Linen wrapped. Tied with frayed twine. "What is it?" Lena asked. Tahana set it in her lap. "A dress for tomorrow. You'll need to look strong." "Strong don't come from a dress," Lena whispered, but her fingers undid the knot anyway. Inside lay a pale blue calico gown, simple and hand-stitched, the kind worn on Sundays or to a naming ceremony. On the hem, Tahana had sewn tiny stars from white thread, one for each night Lena had slept safely in their home. Lena pressed the dress to her chest. "Do I have to speak in front of them?" she asked. "Only if you want to," Tahana said. "But sometimes silence is stronger than shouting." Lena thought about that as the sun went down. She sat on the wagon step with the carved bird in her hand, stroking its wings like it might rise up and fly if she believed hard enough. That night, she didn't sleep much. The moon looked bigger than usual, hanging low and golden, as if watching the earth for something sacred. When dawn touched the land, hooves beat the trail. A dust cloud rose behind Koa's return. Lena was the first to run, barefoot, dress half-buttoned, eyes full of fear and hope tangled together. Koa dismounted and crouched down, arms wide. "You didn't get lost," she gasped, throwing herself into his chest. "Never do," he said into her hair. Tahana stood behind them, face unreadable until her fingers curled at her side. That was how she showed her joy, tight, quiet, trembling. He rose and handed her a paper. Tribal mark. His signature. We're guardians now. By blood and by law. Tahana took it, but her eyes never left his. Thank you, she said, though they both knew the word was not big enough. The gathering was held at the edge of town, near the judge's house. Not a formal court, just a meeting with clipped words and sharp eyes, enough to weigh a soul against public opinion. The Reverend stood on the porch, his coat freshly pressed. Agatha arrived in her best hat, a smug curve at her lips. The marshal flanked the door with arms crossed and a face carved from stone. Koa and Tahana walked together, Lena between them. The judge, a weathered man named Harlan Cross, lifted a brow as they approached. You understand this is irregular, he said, voice low and skeptical. Folk are riled. Folk get riled when wind changes, Koa said. Doesn't make it wrong. Cross studied him. You bring documentation? Koa handed him the paper. Signed by 4 elders. Sealed with council approval. Cross read it. Twice. And the girl? Lena stepped forward. I want to stay, she said. They're my home. Home is not always enough. It was for them, she said, pointing to Tahana. And I've never slept through a night until I met her. I used to dream of fire. I don't anymore. Agatha huffed. She's coached. That child doesn't know what's best. Lena turned toward her. You never asked what I need. You just wanted me to fit in your house like a rug. That silenced the porch. Tahana smiled, not wide, but with pride stitched into her quiet grace. Cross looked between them. I'll make my ruling by sundown. They nodded and walked away, no begging, no pleading, just the strength of those who've already lost before and survived. Back at the wagon, Lena helped Tahana fold herbs into cloth pouches. Sage, lavender, and something she couldn't name. Koa set out the water barrel for cleaning. Do you think he'll say yes? Lena asked. I don't know, Tahana said. But I know who you are. And no paper can change that. I wasn't anyone before. Koa looked over. You were. You just hadn't been seen yet. That night, they lit a fire and made fry bread. Lena laughed as oil popped and Tahana wiped flour from her nose. The stars blinked brighter than usual. You smell like a real kitchen, Koa teased, handing Lena her bread. You sound like a real softie, she teased back. He smiled, a full one this time. Not often. But when he did, it felt like mountains melting. At sundown, a rider came. Marshal Vornigan, dust in his beard and something unspoken in his eyes. He didn't dismount. Just handed Koa a folded slip. Koa read it, then passed it to Tahana. Approved. Guardianship recognized. No further inquiry. Tahana exhaled. Lena looked up at them both. So? I get to stay? Koa knelt. No, little bird. You've already stayed. Now they just have to accept it. Lena threw her arms around him. Then Tahana. Then she spun in a circle, laughing loud enough to wake the hills. They ate the rest of the bread in peace. No shadows hanging overhead. And as the night wrapped its arms around their little corner of the world, Lena curled up beside Tahana beneath a woven quilt. The carved bird sat on the windowsill. Wind tapped at the canvas flaps like a guest asking permission to enter. Tahana whispered into Lena's hair, You're becoming someone strong. I want to be like you, Lena murmured, half asleep. Tahana smiled. Then you already are. Koa sat by the fire, carving again. A new shape. Something with antlers. Something noble. He didn't say what it was. But he knew. He was carving who she'd become. The fire was low by the time the trouble came. Cedarwood snapped and crackled, throwing off brief bursts of orange as Koa finished sharpening his blade, not out of fear, but habit. A man raised on the edge of peace never truly let go of the steel inside him. Tahana stirred the beans with a wooden spoon, steam rising and curling into the cool dusk air. Lena sat beside her, braiding her own hair, the ribbon uneven and fingers clumsy, but she tried, and Tahana didn't correct her. Some things were better learned slow. The day had passed quiet. Too quiet, Koa had said. Birds stayed close to the trees. The wind forgot to speak. And then, hooves. 6 of them, dust pluming behind like storm clouds, spun in reverse. Widow Agatha led the pack. Beside her rode 2 men from town, hired hands or kin, faces tight with purpose. Behind them trailed Reverend Maynard, white collar shining like a blade in the dying light. They didn't dismount. Agatha's voice cut the silence. You think a piece of paper settles it? Think again. Koa stood. He didn't reach for his rifle, though it sat within arm's reach. It's done, he said. Signed. Witnessed. We have guardianship. Not by town standards, she spat. And town standards are the only ones that matter here. Reverend Maynard added, there's been confusion. A second petition has been circulated. The judge may reconsider once emotions cool. Or once you make them boil, Tahana said, standing beside Koa, wooden spoon still in hand. Agatha's eyes settled on Lena. She should be with decent folk. God-fearing. Civilized. Lena stepped forward. Koa's hand twitched toward her, protective. But she didn't flinch. I already found home, she said. You just didn't notice. One of the men dismounted. Younger. Nervous. His hand hovered near the pistol at his belt. Koa stepped between him and the firelight. I'd rethink that. The man hesitated, glanced at Agatha. She's a child. She don't know what she's saying. Koa's voice deepened, quiet as thunder beneath the earth. She knows more than you ever dared to. Agatha raised a rifle. You can't intimidate us into silence. Tahana moved without thinking, placing herself in front of Lena. And the moment cracked. The nervous man drew his pistol. Fast. Sloppy. Koa's knife left his hand before the man's gun fired. Steel hit flesh with a sound like split canvas. The man howled, dropped the gun, and staggered back. Not fatal. But loud enough to scatter the night. Agatha screamed. Reverend Maynard stepped down, hands raised. Stop this. There are children here. You brought war to a cookfire, Koa growled. You brought shame to the county, Agatha snapped, clutching her rifle. That girl doesn't belong to you. She does, said Tahana, stepping forward now, eyes burning. Not by blood. But by every sunrise we've guarded her. Every meal we've shared. Every night she slept without fear. The marshal arrived then. No trumpet. No dust. Just his horse and a quiet stare. What's happening? He asked, looking straight at the rifle in Agatha's hands. They've taken a child, she began. Who has more peace now than she ever did before, Koa finished. Vorn dismounted, walking slow, boots creaking like old truth. He picked up the dropped pistol and looked at the wounded man. Then at Agatha. She's under tribal guardianship. That holds, he said. And threatening a child with firearms, that doesn't. Agatha trembled. You'd defend them over your own people? I'm defending what's right, he said. And I've seen more family in their silence than in your shouting. Agatha dropped the rifle. Koa picked up his blade from the dirt. Wiped it once. She did without ceremony. Reverend Maynard's voice softened. The town won't forget this. They will, Tahana said. They've forgotten worse. Vorn turned to Koa. Anything broken? Not yet, he answered. Lena stood still, fists balled, shoulders squared like someone much older. She wasn't shaking. Not anymore. The fire behind her burned low, catching the edge of her dress in warm glow. Vorn glanced at her, and for the first time, he tipped his hat not in pity, but in respect. They rode off slow, wounded pride dragging like a loose wheel. The night felt stretched afterward, long and taut, like silence between the beats of a heart. Koa cleaned the blade. Tahana stirred the pot again. Lena returned to her braid. Then, after a long while, Koa spoke. "You were brave." Lena didn't answer. She finished tying the ribbon, crooked and all, and walked to the fire. Sat between them. "I don't feel brave," she whispered. "You don't have to," Tahana said. "You only have to stay." "Will they come back?" "Maybe." "What if they try to take me again?" Koa looked into the flames. "Then they'll learn what it means to fight a man who's built a home with his bare hands." Lena reached out and took his calloused hand. Held it. Tahana laid her head against his shoulder. And for the first time, Koa let the weight rest. Just a little. Later, when Lena curled in her blanket, Koa stood over her with the carved deer, finished now, antlers proud, legs strong. He set it beside the bird. Tahana watched from the doorway. "She won't forget tonight." "Neither will I," he said. It was the first time I heard her speak without shaking. Tahana crossed to him, slipped her arm around his waist. They stood there together, watching her sleep. Outside, stars pressed against the heavens like promises waiting to be spoken. Coyotes howled in the far hills, mourning or celebrating, none could say. Inside, a warmth lingered that no storm could take. Lena stirred once. Sat up. Looked around at the two people who had become more than guardians, more than safety. "Is this really my home?" she asked, voice groggy with sleep. Koa knelt beside her. "You tell me." Lena looked at him, then at Tahana. At the firelight. The smell of stew. The quiet peace. And she nodded. Then whispered the word like it had waited her whole life to be spoken. "Home." The fire snapped gently. No more needed saying.